Do you not have this?
I have the one we started practicing on, but I can't find it.
You can't find it? Then yeah, you can grab another one.
Alright. Can I just do the same thing that we started on the first day?
Yeah, just get caught up. Alright, guys. Sidewalks. Now, the sidewalks and trees are the last things that we're going to add. And they look pretty simple, and they actually are pretty simple, but there's just a little thing about sidewalks and trees that will really mess with your head. Jasmine, focus with me. There's just a little thing about them, that the reason that I do them, that they'll mess with your head just a little bit, okay? And you'll see as we get going how they can do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the sidewalk on this side over here, and I need to create 2 lines. Technically it's 3, but this line is already kind of drawn for me. So for the sidewalk, we need the top of the sidewalk. So since this line is kind of already added, since it was the bottom of the building, I don't really need to add that again. But I do need to add this line, which is going to be the edge of the sidewalk. And then I need to add this line, which is going to represent the curb. Now, the biggest thing to watch out for with the curb here is that the further apart you make these 2 lines, the deeper your curb is going to feel. So you want it to feel like a curb and not like a person has to step off like the Grand Canyon down into the street. So the first line that I make, the first guideline, is going to be a fair distance from the buildings, but then the other one is going to be pretty close behind it. So I'm going to take my ruler. That'll be the top. And then I want to kind of judge and make a skinny little line for the next one. That'll be the curb. So just 2 lines from the vanishing point, which will end up being the sidewalk and the curb. Now, as far as the lines in the sidewalk go, this is the part that's going to mess with your head. Because in order to fill the space with the lines on the sidewalk, it is very, very tempting to hold your ruler so that it is diagonal because it fits better within the lines. But you're going to have to really focus and concentrate as you do this, because if you draw your lines so that they're diagonal, it'll look like your sidewalk is a ramp and that people are walking down it like this rather than straight up and down. The trick with drawing the sidewalk lines is that they have got to stay horizontal. So when I do this, I actually kind of double and triple check that my ruler is parallel to the horizon line. And if it is parallel to the horizon line, and I usually just hold my paper this way because it makes my life easier, then I can make the sidewalk line. Now I'm only going to fill the top line of the sidewalk, so I'm only filling this guideline. I'm leaving this second little strip alone. And as I go further back in space, the sidewalk lines can get closer together. And as I get closer to the viewer, I can make them a little bit further apart. So for me, it just helps me to turn the paper like this because I don't think about it as much rather than doing it like this. But that's just me. You can try it. You can leave it. But you want to keep those lines very, very horizontal. this far together?
Oh, yeah.
Keep that there and you can copy up with it. Alright, so for the curb, it's the same thing in terms of it kind of messing with your head, because students always want to make it so that their ruler is crooked like this. And when you do that, it ends up looking like a ramp, which if you want to make a ramp, it's fine. But if you don't want to make a ramp, which was not what we're doing today, we're making a curb, your ruler has to stay very vertical because it's a vertical line. So every place I put that horizontal, in the curb area, I'm going to go back and add the vertical. So once you get that, try to add the second one on the other side of the street. Now on this one I am going to draw 3 lines because I don't have the buildings there. I made it a little skinny on the other side of the street, but probably should have made it a little wider. Walk around and let me know if you're having trouble with your sidewalk, y'all. For the sidewalk? For this right here, they have to be horizontal. It helps me when I do it.
Right when I come back, because I already went to the ones.
Because what?
Right when I come back, because I already had went to the ones.
Okay. Well, just take your stuff with you then. I hope you feel better. See you later. All right, so trees. You guys ready for trees? Let's do some trees. All right, so on the other hand, on the other side of the street, we're going to add some trees. And I just call these my lollipop trees because I'm not going to get super detailed with leaves and all that jazz. I'm just going to have like a blob on top, which is the leaves, and then a stick on the bottom, which is the trunk. Okay? So the first thing I need to do when I'm setting up trees that are planted in a row are start with guidelines. So I have to draw 3 lines for my trees. The first line is going to show me how tall the trees need to go. The second line is going to show me where the bottoms of the leaves meet the trunk. And then the last line is going to be where I plant the trunk of the tree in the ground. So at first, it looks kind of crazy, like just a bunch of lines. And it is just a bunch of lines. So you kind of have to remember what each line does. So the first line is going to be where I put the trunks. The second line is going to be where I want the bottoms of the leaves and the trunk to meet. And the third line is going to be how tall do I want the trees? So that'll probably end up above the horizon line. So when you look at it, you're just like, whoa, that's just a bunch of lines. And it is. But you have to remember which are the ones that you just draw to kind of fill in. If your leaves end up like covering up the horizon line, that's an extra line that you didn't just draw, which can become confusing. So you could erase the horizon line because it's going to get covered up. However, if your tree trunks ended up like above the horizon line, then you will still see the horizon line in between the trees. So it kind of depends on where you placed everything and whether you choose to erase the horizon line or not. You may have to put it back in. So I just erased mine so I could more clearly see my first line, second line, and third line. All right, I am going to start with the tree tops. And I always start my trees, and this is just kind of a thing with drawing that I do in general, is I draw the thing that is closest to me first. And the reason I draw the thing that's closest to me first is because there's going to be some overlapping. And if I go here, it's very difficult to just draw part of the tree, or I have to draw the whole thing, and then I end up having to do a lot more erasing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw. And I also want to point out that you created guidelines. Like, if you follow them too closely and you're afraid to go outside of them a little bit, your trees will end up looking kind of weird. So remember, it's a guideline, and it doesn't have to be perfectly inside the line. If you make them too perfect, it looks like the tops got trimmed off and they're kind of straight rather than organic. So I'm just going to... And as they go back in space, I have to stay within these guidelines, and that's going to dictate to me how they get a little bit smaller and smaller and smaller as they go back in space. Now, if you want to, then you can erase the guidelines if they're bugging you. We just needed them because we needed to know how big each one had to be, roughly. I still haven't made the trunks yet, though, so I'm not erasing that one. That's next. Now, if you just like, I think I heard somebody say those look like bushes. Yeah, they look like bushes right now because they don't have the trunk. So if you want to make bushes, there you go. There's bushes. But if we're going to turn them into trees, we have to add the tree trunk. So the tree trunk is, again, it seems pretty simple because we're just making a stick. But if you do it wrong or crooked, your tree looks kind of funny in a hurry. So, where did I put my tree? I didn't see. I'm going to do a couple tree trunks. I want you to watch me. And I'm going to do one of them wrong on purpose so you guys can kind of see what can go wrong with trees in a hurry. So the trick with the trees is that I need to make my ruler very vertical if I want it to look like the tree is standing up straight. So out of each poof in the center, I'm going to make a vertical line. You guys ever watch Sesame Street when you were a little kid, or maybe even now, who knows?
Yeah.
And they have that little segment that goes, one of these things is not like the others.
Yeah.
All right, look at my trees. One of these things. Do you see how it looks like it's starting to fall down? Right, and it's all because I got my lines crooked. So if you don't stay vertical, your tree is going to look like it's tipping over.
Those trees look like that.
I know that some trees are falling over.
On the road,
If-
like McDonald's from here.
Yeah.
There's like a tree that's like completely crooked, like angled.
There's also one that looks like a jack-o'-lantern because they carved like a
Yeah.
face in it, right? So yes, trees can fall over. It's true. But you don't want it to look like it's falling over unless that's your intention. So I just changed those two lines to be vertical and everything's okay. So I will erase out the rest of the guidelines. And then I'm not done with my trees. Something else is kind of weird. So let me erase these out and then you guys can look at it and you can tell me what else looks weird. Okay, look at my trees. They look flat, right? So they almost look like the chunks look like they're made out of cardboard instead of round. And the reason for that is because the bottom of the tree trunk needs to be horizontal. So I'm going to do a replace and erase. So I'm going to take from this corner over, I'm going to make a horizontal, and then erase off this extra. And now my tree will look like it's firmly planted in the ground. So make a line, make a line. So for the tree to be finished, you want to finish off the trunk right.
Maybe rounded.
Yeah, you can do lots of things. If you want to get into like making tree roots and all, getting fancy, you can do that. You can make it round. I just am doing some like lollipop trees just for, because we're practicing. But yeah, you can do all that. Just make sure that this is predominantly horizontal and. There you go. Need some texture. This is my leaf texture. You can fill in as many details as you want. I actually got my trunk a little off center. Even it out a little. Alright, so I'll do a quick pass around. Got some arm things going on between us. The trees look funky. Okay, start with the top, the lollipop. So, alright, so this is your bed. How is your morning, right? So start.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's okay if they pop out a little bit. I mean, trees are like, so keep them close to the guidelines. You know what I mean? Try to keep them small as they go back out there a little bit. Good, just finish at the bottom. So instead of leaving the bottom diagonal, just make it horizontal. Or you just get it to. Yeah. Yep. Sidewalks are just a little funky because you got a little slanted. You're not really horizontal. This side is straight. You see this? This one is like. See that?
I wanted to make these look like slabs or stone to make it patch in the beach,
Yeah.
but I think I made them too thick. It looks like big concrete blocks
Oh.
lying in the beach.
You can turn them into, I was gonna say like those beds that they put on the beach, you know? And people laying on them on the beach.
And this is supposed to look like, does that look like wood? One
Yeah.
beach goes up.
You got the boardwalk going there?
Okay, so it's here. Right.
Stephanie, your lines in the sidewalk are in the street. Okay, so I want to just make mention of two more things real quick. Or it's really one more thing, and you don't have to draw this. But, you know, when you get into perspective drawing, you see that, like, everything lines up, right? Even I was talking to somebody about, like, letters. If I was going to make a sign on the building, if I'm drawing an E, for example, like a capital E, there's a vertical and 3 horizontals, right? So the vertical stays vertical. The horizontals of the E's would go to the vanishing point. Like, all these things start, like, going to the vanishing point. But I want to remind you that things in nature are not in perspective. So sometimes I see students and they want to add clouds and they start setting up guidelines for the clouds, and then the clouds start looking like they're getting sucked into the earth or something like that. It gets kind of weird, you know? So when you're doing clouds, they're just straight. You just draw them. And if you do want to draw something like clouds, they're usually poofy on the top and flatter on the bottom. But I would just free draw them. I don't need anything to go to a guideline. I don't need anything to go to a vanishing point. That's just how they are. Another thing I see this with is water. Like when people start adding like a lake or something back here, they start making all the lines of the lake look going this way. And it would just look horizontal like this because it's just water. It starts looking like things are getting like sucked into a vacuum if you get too much like weird stuff going to that vanishing point. So, you can draw some clouds if you want to, but I just came around with a blank sheet of paper, and what I think we're really ready for is to start getting into 2-point perspective. Now today, we're going to do 2-point perspective.